Hi, good morning. This is Debbie Mann with Festivals and Events Ontario, and thank you all for joining us here at the Tuesday Talks with FEO. Our guest today is Rodola. Rodola's with Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. I've worked with Rodola for quite a few years now. It seems like forever, Rodola, but about 5 or 6 that we've met.
Yeah.
Anyway. So thanks for coming on board as our guest and joining us to talk about what Workplace Safety and Prevention Services is wanting to share with us today. So first, why don't you just give us a brief overview of who you are, and then we'll just jump right into it.
Sure. So thank you for having me on this morning. For those of you that I have not met in our work with Festivals and Events Ontario over the years, WSPS is the designated health and safety agency for all services in Ontario. And alongside our sister agencies of Infrastructure Health and Safety, Public Services Health and Safety, and Health and Safety North, we form the prevention system for the province. I've been with WSPS as a health and safety practitioner for 16 years now. And prior to that, my experience has been in commercial construction. And before that, even, I was doing an environmental sciences degree. And health and safety just became a natural part of what we were doing on a day-to-day basis. So in the talk today and in the title today, I wanted to continue what Peter Ashwin was talking about last week. And he had introduced the Event Horizon, Festivals and Events Horizon for 2021. Today, I'd like to do a little bit of an overview on risk assessments in light of some of the innovations that are coming forward for festivals and events. And hopefully we'll have enough time to do 2 tabletop exercises on 2 very real life events, one that has happened already and one that is upcoming. So I'm gonna start to share my screen if that's all right, Jay.
Yep, go ahead, Rodola. And anybody, if you have questions or you want to, when Rodola starts participating, you can go into the chat and I guess write your answers or do whatever you need to do, right, Rodola?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So a bit of a plug for the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture. I wanted to get that in the right order. I have been doing some work with them over the summer as well. And most of you already know the province has allotted $9 million in support through the Reconnect Festivals and Events program to support municipalities in safely connecting folks back into their communities. Is some of the innovation that I have heard of that's in development so far are reverse parades where people will drive through or drive by the static floats, drive-in music concerts and movies. I'm hoping that the drive-in movie theater gets a little bit of a comeback because those were always fun growing up as a little kid. And I believe there's some really great holiday tree lighting festivals that are planned that will take us into Christmas and the new year as well. So some of the requirements is open to organizers with a minimum of $50,000, operating budget, and a capacity to safely reconnect Ontarians with their communities. So just a bit of a plug for one of the other ministries. And part of what we do in health and safety is a lot of interdepartmental work. So working with this particular ministry over the summer has really helped me and my colleagues understand the depth of work that has to happen to get this industry certainly back up and running. And the amount of work that people are doing right now is incredible too. Some housekeeping items for this presentation. It is part of a larger presentation that we do for risk assessment. It is a course that we do offer, but all of our measures that have been cited here and everything in our material is under the compliance of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, as well as public health directives currently. Any of the emergency orders, I know that has been lifted, but we will be compliant with that in our materials, as well as guidance from the Ontario Chief Medical Officer. And the last bit of housekeeping that I wanted to mention, you may hear some noise or some music in the background. You might hear a Paw Patrol theme. It's because my 3-year-old has broken away from his handlers and he's now in the vicinity somewhere. So it's there. He's there. He's quite helpful. So in the waves that we have gone through over the last 6 months, and WSPS has been quite busy supporting those frontline businesses that have stayed open, and also getting help to the people that are going back to work and the firms that are bringing their folks back to work. One of the questions that we have been asked is, what does it say about COVID? How do I keep my people safe? What am I supposed to do? What does the law say to do now? One thing to keep in mind, health and safety legislation has not changed. It's remained the same. And the duty to do everything reasonable under the circumstances remains the same. COVID is a hazard. And the risk that people can contract the hazard, the risk to people while in the workplace, those are the things that we have to control. So in going through this risk assessment, very briefly, and certainly as a module in lightning speed, keep in mind that there is legislation that has remained in place, and there may be changes to the way that you do things. Certainly new guidance and new requirements may have come into place. I've been, this morning I was asked about contractor sign-in, which we could certainly talk about a little bit later on. So all of the responsibilities remain the same. And this is, again, in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the internal responsibility system. And briefly, what it says is that in every, or at every festival and event, there is a role that is played by everyone in the reduction of risks, as well as the prevention of injuries and illness. So we all have a role to play, and that hasn't changed. What does this now look like in this new landscape that we find ourselves in? So that's what I'm hoping that we can get to. With regards to the employees, this is an entire section I'm sure we could spend an entire webinar on, but what it comes down to is attitudes and behaviors. Coupled with a risk assessment, there is a fulsome health and safety program for any festival or event. And in this particular vein, we can also talk about volunteers as well. And that I know volunteers make up a great amount of the workforce that happens during festivals and events. And part of the science that we use during risk assessments is a hierarchy of controls. So what we're looking at really is, from the very top, how do we eliminate the hazards through engineering controls? And this is, primarily where we want to start in terms of designing our programs and our events, down through to, as you see on the bottom, personal protective equipment, which I know has been on everybody's minds almost daily. Certainly has been given a lot of attention, and rightly so, over the last few months, even just with regards to supply and what type of equipment we should be using. So there is a lot of discussion that we could have with regards to health and safety. But for today, I'd like us to just sort of run through our basics and see what we can come up with in our tabletop exercises. So 2 things, we've got our workplace attitudes and behaviors, the risk assessments, which at an emergency management level, we call the HIRA as well. And here are some of the regulations. So like I said, the health and safety regulations haven't changed. And some of the more common regulations that we find in tourism and recreation are up on the screen. So framing our discussion, what would, say, first aid look like? Would it change as you plan your next festival or your next event? What does electrical work look like? And in some cases, I know electrical work may be contracted out. So that process in itself, given the extra layer of COVID measures that we have in place in the province, what are these things going to look like, as Peter mentioned, in 2021 with the event horizon and further into that year 2021, 2022? Will some of these things change? And I was listening to the discussion from last week, and most definitely somebody had mentioned supply chain. So we know, and this is our reality, we know that in the supply chain, some folks have shut their doors, and unfortunately have shut their doors permanently. So now what does this all do to our planning mechanisms and the way we plan for the future in light of, because we're health and safety, in light of some of the legislation that's out there? So parts and little bits and pieces to start our discussion for our exercises. This is our continuous improvement program and elements of the assessment that we teach, having to start with a policy and a program and doing your risk assessment, which is key and foundational to us in health and safety. Communication, absolutely vital and key, and goes into what your folks bring to the workplace, the attitudes and the behaviors. And certainly at the end, looking back and really being critical about the things that did work, as well as the things that were challenging, and building that into your next planning process. So my last webinar was in the food service industry, and some of the things that our folks in that industry brought forward and they had concerns over are outlined here. So were there tasks that could be minimized? Are there barriers that we put into place? We've all seen this over the last few months, and certainly we've seen a lot of these types of questions or iterations of the same question over the last few months. But thinking about moving into next year and thinking about the folks that you would normally work with, that either you bring them on as a team, they're on staff with you already, and some of the contractors or even sponsors that you work with, what would their concerns be? And how would you bring that into the planning mechanism for next year? What do you think that they would ask in their respective roles as you plan for your next event? So in the risk assessment course, we start with planning and things that we normally plan for that are naturally occurring. We see that in inclement weather. I know I can see that Janet Sellery is on the call and has, a couple of years ago, we attended the first Event Safety Summit Alliance downtown. It was fantastic, and they had a meteorologist on who was amazing. That talk was incredible. So the things that we normally plan for, environmental, things that are human caused and technology caused, now we have this extra layer that is certainly prevalent and top of mind for everyone right now, and that is the virus, the COVID, and what is happening with this pandemic. So taking things into a formalized process, we teach writing out your procedures. What are they? And some of this may be new, but for those of you that have been doing this for a long time, and I can feel that there's quite a few people on the call, and I know that there's a lot of experience in the room. So what are the procedures that are in place already? The procedures that you rely upon, they're written down. That's key for us is documentation. And then how are you communicating those procedures to the staff? Is your communication going to be different now? And certainly with some folks that have been working from home or have not been working over the last couple of months, the communication streams might have altered. And how are we getting the word out to folks in this particular environment that we find ourselves in? And then training. So in the formalization of your plans, those that have the specific duties as well as the necessary skills, that training, how are we planning and budgeting for that training as well? And we will have the opportunity to work the plan certainly in the next little while, and evaluating the things that went well, evaluating the things that you were challenged with, as well as acknowledging what we can do in certainly conversation with either our partners or contractors, conversation with our staff, and those that have shared in that collective experience of the festival or the event. And finally, the implementation of your plan. So throughout the course materials, we do a lot of incident inspections, incident management. How does this now look when you think about the things that you would like to do in the future, the plans that you have right now? Has anything changed? And certainly in the structure of putting your next festival or event together, what does communication look like? Throughout the course, we've asked people to give us ideas of good communication as well as challenging communication, and certainly we know that there are rumors and how to deal with media, but in the event of an emergency, how do we communicate that? How does the city or the town that we're operating in, what are those communications looking like, as well as our supply chain and our customers? And the last piece, and certainly not the least, is the team ready. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, some people may not have been working for the last 6 months, and bringing them back to work after the situation that they have been in. What does it mean to be ready for this next festival, where I know that sometimes people are working longer hours and straight through just to get the event up and running? Are your people equipped? And here is where I'd like to put in our piece on workplace mental health. Prior to the pandemic, we knew that nearly 7 million people would experience a mental health problem in any given year. We also knew, again, prior to the pandemic, that the struggles with workplace mental health affected about 1 in 5 Canadians, and of the leading contributors to workplace disability, mental health challenges made up 30% of that. Now, this is all prior to the pandemic. I can only imagine what these statistics will look like once they've been taken during this time that we've had over the last 6 months. And these statistics have come from the Canadian Mental Health Commission of Canada, where WSPS has been working since the 70s on putting together wholesome, fulsome programs on workplace mental health, how managers can help, how employees can help. And right now I know that there is so much out there around mental health just in general. You could easily open up your laptop and find a meditation program. You could easily reach out through insurance and EAPs and find counseling and help. And as festivals and events, the amount of community engagement that you have certainly plays a great part in the community's mental health. So thinking about your employees, and as foundational as they are, what could you incorporate, and how would you take a bit of a temperature check of the people that are coming back to work with you around mental health? Because people will be your first responders. They will be the people that will help clean up. They will be your management team, and they will need supports as well. This is difficult, and it's been difficult for everyone. Personally, I can say that we work from home. So prior to the pandemic and everybody working from home, this was really nothing new to us. But as I mentioned before, there's a 3-year-old running around in my house and doing my work, as well as taking care of my little one, has really pushed some of my limits during these last 6 months as well. So along to the hazard assessment, and just a very quick overview so that we can get to the tabletop exercises, which I was really looking forward to doing with you today. In a risk assessment, we have a hazard and a risk, and I mentioned these before. The hazard has the potential to harm, and a risk is the combination of the likelihood of the occurrence of that harm and the severity of that harm. And generally, really what we want to try to do, one, is identify what that hazard is, analyze it, and then find ways of control. So in tourism, recreation, and hospitality industry, what we have found over the years are these top 10 highest risks. So the first one being just a lack of awareness of health and safety. And then what has been more sort of on our radar over the last couple of years is musculoskeletal, as well as the working alone and working remotely. So I'll ask in our tabletop exercise in a little bit, are there any other risks that have come up that you think are a little bit more prevalent now in tourism and recreation and hospitality? I know fatigue is one of them as well. So back to our planning, the things that we normally plan for, naturally occurring, human caused, technology, and certainly the climate that we find ourselves in. And the biggest question that we've been asked so far is, okay, so what if one of my workers tests positive for COVID? Well, this is straight from public health guidance and under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. If you are advised that a worker has an occupational illness due to an exposure in the workplace or a claim has been filed with WSIB, the employer is required to notify the ministry in writing within 4 days. So if you have questions, there is the Occupational Health and Safety contact number on the screen as well for you to ask. But I can tell you the far-reaching implications of all of this, and I can share this. It's someone in my family has tested positive for the virus. His wife is a teacher and they have 3 children. So his wife has to notify her school as well, and they're all isolating. And the kids, their respective classrooms have all isolated as well. So that's 3 classrooms. The wife, she has a classroom as well. So all of those children have had to isolate. And as the numbers start to rise, the effects of this get closer to home. So this has been recent for this member of my family, and you think, yes, he's the only one that tested positive in his family. The rest of his family are tested negative. However, the far-reaching implications are more evident when you start to break it down into the different classrooms of the kids and his wife's classroom, who happens to be a teacher as well. So this is the chart that we use generally to walk through and formulate our hazard assessment. Just asking some very basic questions. What are the hazards? What's the priority? And any of the action items that we would take to control. So this is you'll find this in risk assessments and hazard assessments in a few different iterations, but the general questions are the same. What is it? What's the severity, and how do we control it? So things that you should be asking yourselves. And I want to also mention here too, I have come across event management software that does do this. There's a few that are on the market right now, and some of you may actually use some of this event management software. So this has been built into a few of those. And I think that as a tool, they're quite helpful to get the conversation started, certainly, and to identify different departments which could use some of the help that these hazard identifications can pinpoint in an event. And then when you do have your risk assessment, now you're assessing against the standards. So we have our industry standards. We have the Occupational Health and Safety Act. What does the legislation say? We have building codes and fire codes. Some of the municipal bylaws certainly affect some of the festivals and events that are put on as well. So putting together a full risk assessment really requires doing the work and assessing your hazards. What is the environment that we find ourselves in? What do the laws say that govern this environment? And how do we put that together to keep our guests as well as our workers safe prior, during, and after the event? Just a reiteration of the types of controls that we would like to put in. The best type of control for us at any point in time is trying to eliminate the hazard altogether. And as we work through the hierarchy of controls, we then go down into the personal protective equipment. And when I teach this course, it's, the last thing we'd like to do is to just hand over a set of gloves and a mask to someone and say, go at it. What we'd like to try to do is actually design this so that we're eliminating the hazards altogether and trying to keep our workers safe. In there as well is training, and how much and how well have we trained our staff. If I had all the time in the world, I'd love to talk more about the great experiences that I've had volunteering at festivals and at events where the volunteer trainer did great work on health and safety. So there is that aspect to volunteer, to festivals and events. Some of the resources that are always available to you on WSPS.ca. We also have an upcoming app that we would like to launch. I can't give any I can't give any more details right now because our IT guys are feverishly working on it, but it will help prior to going into work. I'm asking assessment questions around COVID and in future around health and safety. The Ministry of Labor, their website is on the screen, lots of information there, as well as CCOHS, which stands for the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety. Some fantastic resources from CCOHS, and also, of course, Ontario.ca for all of the COVID-related questions you have. They have a great page too on all of the available funding that's out there right now for folks to apply for. So, to our tabletop exercise. I don't want to take any more time, but I'd really like to engage everybody that's on the call today and sort of push further what Peter's talked about last week. So a few weeks ago, Debbie and I talked about this, the Flaming Lips concert, and I purposely did not go into the finer details of all of the articles that I've read so that I could be as objective as possible when going through this with you. So the facts as I know it, Flaming Lips had a concert and they put everybody in attendance. There was 100 people only, and they put everybody in a bubble. And at the same time they were having or putting on their concert, they also filmed the video. So we've got some great images here. And prior to, I really love this image as well. So as just a very small forward-thinking, very brief kind of popcorny exercise, if you're going to look at doing a risk assessment for this was put into your lab, what are some of the questions that you would have around putting this together? And you can use the chat, I believe, to start putting in some of the questions that you would have and some of the things that you would do, the people that you would have on board for this.
So yes, they can use the chat, Rodola.
They can, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. So any questions that you would, where would you start? And background to this, as I understand it, the band, this was not, using the bubbles was not new to the band. They actually liked using bubbles prior to, and I believe the lead singer, again, because I didn't read the article, I wanted to be as objective as possible. I believe the lead singer actually got married in a bubble. He really liked these a lot. And these bubbles, as part of the question, they come from China. So they're manufactured in China.
What was the lead singer in a bubble when he was entertaining?
Yes, he was.
Oh, was he? Okay.
Yes, he was. So there he is.
Okay.
So where would you start? What would you ask?
Okay.
I can't get to the chat.
You can't?
I cannot.
Oh.
Okay, here we go. So
Okay.
my concern would be having people in the bubbles who might have breathing issues, for sure. How much air is in those bubbles? Absolutely. Are participants required to sign a waiver to be in the bubble? Yeah, exactly. Do these bubbles self-repair if they're punctured? Will attendees get to the bubbles safely without the rows of bubbles? How do you get in them? Yeah. So oxygen and performing. And what if the bubble bursts? Great questions. How many bubbles? So how many bubbles per concert? They limited the attendance to 100 people. And here it is. How would you get to them if there was an emergency? That was one of the first things I thought about. What if there was an emergency? What would you do? And once you get in, can you get out? If someone's anxious, how do they get out of the bubble? And how do they get out of the crowd? Has anybody ever played the bubble soccer game with these bubbles that you put over your head? People that do suffer from anxiety, not a great idea. How do you exit safely at the end of the event? Yeah, so these are certainly some of the things that you would just, if this fell in your lap and a band that you were managing said, hey, let's do it all in bubbles. Yeah. How expensive? Exactly. Are they? We're all working with budgets right now. Absolutely. And how much oxygen is in the bubbles and how long can people stay inside? So here's a great question. How long is a normal concert? 2 hours, I think. So how long can people stay inside? Can you get out like you could normally do in a regular concert and sort of take a break and go back inside? And are they sanitary? Yeah, so some great questions that you would ask if this sort of fell in your lap, and here you go, this is what we'd like to do. So when you have to pee, what do you do? Exactly, what do you do? I love this picture so much. And then the next one I want to share with you is this one. This is the Journey into Enchantment Festival coming up, where you are asked to drive through the Angus Glen Golf Club grounds. So again, this has landed in your lap, and to start this process as your risk assessment, what are some of the things that you would be asking yourselves, some of the hazards that you would identify or you could identify, and ways of controlling those hazards? This is very pretty. Oops, sorry. So, speed controls for the vehicles. Absolutely. I did not manage to get a ticket to do the drive-through at the Toronto Zoo as much as we'd love to, but that was certainly something that you would want. Traffic management and control. Do you have to interact with anyone when you drive in? Do you pay or donate? Exhaust fumes, how long is the route? I believe it's 8 kilometers. And are there areas to stop? Vehicle breakdown, gas or battery issues, trying to get CAA into that. How does that work? What are your fire hazards going to be? I do have to say, with houses of worship, some of the bigger ones, I belong to a mega church in Toronto, and they have the space. So they have been, once a month, they have been doing a drive-through evening service, weather permitting. And the most recent one that they did a week and a half ago, nobody was allowed out of the cars. So there's a policing aspect as well. So all of the volunteers that were holding up signs, you know, on the radio frequency that you could better tune into, one of the questions they had was, okay, so what if somebody does get out of the car? It's empowering your employees and maintaining that empowerment throughout the event, that they are empowered to say, please get back in your car. Are items possible to reach? So we have possible vandalism, definitely electrical hazards. How can a vehicle get out of line and exit in an emergency? Great question. Weather, how do you clear the snow? How do you clear the snow in these current setups? Anybody that's done this before, that'd be a great question to ask. So part of what I wanted to demonstrate in the short time that I had with you, plans for managing possible road rage, yes. And what if a car gets stuck in the snow? Absolutely, get stuck in the snow and road rage. That's a great combination. So icy conditions, yeah. Couple more. So this was, what if the lights go out? Show's over, folks. So I wanted to, in the short time that we had, I appreciated Peter Ashwin coming in and talking last week and putting that event horizon forward and keeping us forward thinking. So power outage, yep. So if we, taking that into this week's talk and actually, doing a little bit of work, tabletop exercises for planning your festivals and events are fantastic. Just getting as many people involved as possible and just running through it. They're fantastic ways of working together, team building, as well as the collective wisdom that's in the room, and certainly the collective wisdom that's in the room right now on this call. So I do appreciate your time. I wish I had a lot more time because there's so much more to tell you in the world of health and safety. But I wanted to leave you with this. Driving to an appointment yesterday, I drove by the wine rack store. Some of you may have them in your communities. They had the best poster. It's very few words. It said, "Our grapes are crushed. Us, never crushed." So that to me, instantly, I thought about this talk and I thought about the inspiration that festivals and events bring to a community every time that there's an event put on. And I just wanted to wish everyone good fortune in the days and the months ahead for this industry. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Rodola. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Wow. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask away or put it in chats, and we will. Getting lots of thank yous, Rodola.
Okay.
in the chat room. Does anybody have any questions? There we go. Thanks. Anything? All right. Well, you were very succinct, and you did, like Janet said, you included a lot of information in this presentation, and we're really grateful for this and for your time. We're so grateful. And yes, somebody asked, will it be available? It will be. We're recording it and I'll send it out. What was that,
Yes.
Rodola?
And there is a paper that I really wanted to bring today. It's just, it wasn't made available in time. There is a paper on innovation in festivals and events that was just written, and it was dated in September. Hasn't cleared the ResearchGate clearinghouse for research papers yet, but as soon as I receive it, I will send it over to Debbie.
Perfect, and I'll get it out to everybody. Dave, you have a question.
Yeah, hi, Rodola. It's just from my time on the ministry's roundtables, and I'm just wondering, and I get the roundtable exercises and getting all the different ideas together, but from the beginning of this pandemic, there's been a reluctancy on the minister's part to put out a set of standards that have to be met to get back in business, and they've been asking all of us to come up with ideas on how to get back to business. Why wasn't there ever a standard that was put out that if you meet these conditions, you're open for business, with the standards taken in mind, whether that's PPE or social distancing, crowd control numbers and stuff like that? Because you've got so many different sectors with so many different ways that they have to do things or not do things. Like a set of standards, to me, would have been a lot easier than what we've all went through.
Yes. So I'm not going to speak on behalf of the ministry, but I can give you my own personal opinion. And I think it's part of it is in your question. Is there the differences sometimes between the industries could be so minute, but also so vast that it would be hard to be prescriptive with one set without having to then rework back in an industry. So on my team for industry relations and government relations, we have our ag specialists as well. So a set of standards, and knowing how much work that they've put into helping the ag businesses, a set of standards for the ag businesses and and a set of standards for, say, our retailers, it's difficult because there are so many moving parts, and there are also with those moving parts, there are a lot of players. And it's a great question, because it certainly some things that would have been very helpful. Absolutely, I acknowledge that, and certainly very helpful for us as consultants to help others. But there's just so much. There's differences that would really have started to fragment if we had started to say these 5 standards are what we should all get to. It would have been very difficult for some folks to comply. And I'm sorry, it's just not.
Yeah.
I'm not satisfied with my answer to you.
And I'm thinking of like the situation right now with gyms versus dance studios. You know, why are one able to operate, function, and the other is not? In, you know, seemingly they're just as safe as a gym or something like that. I mean, that you can go on and on down the line, you know, with all kinds of different examples of why you can make it work, or, you know, if you have the property to socially distance and space out and everything else. I know it's been frustrating on the sector association side, because, you know, a lot of the ideas we put in, we've still to date got no information back that that's good or no, that's not good. And it's frustrating.
It is, and I do acknowledge that.
I do know they do always point to you guys to make sure that, you know, as a set of standards, make sure you're at least incorporating all of their stuff in it.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It really has kept a lot of people awake over the last 6 months. Yeah. Yeah, and I do apologize. I can't give you anything better than that, but it is quite challenging.
I'm just going to read Janet's. Janet commented on this. The Ministry of Labor live performance. Unless Janet, you just want to unmute yourself and talk about it. Okay. Oh, there you are. Hi. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
So yeah, the note that I posted on the chat was just about the Ministry of Labor Live Performance Advisory Committee, which Rodola is a representative on the committee representing WSPS. And we've been working since, I want to say June, maybe before that, to develop a guideline based on the film and television guideline. So film and television, theirs was fast-tracked. They were permitted to open. Ours is based on theirs, but even with that, so much adaptation was needed that we're still working through. You know, I think it's solid, but it needs to still go through that approval process. But there's a real disconnect, in my view, between, you know, the Ministry of Labor, the Ministry of Heritage, Public Health, and there seems to be very little ability for them to be consistent, for them to be able to look at the differences in risk between different pieces of our industry. And that has been terribly, terribly frustrating. I'm involved also in a guidance from, it's called Lights On, and it's a venue it's a venue guide for theaters. And it is, again, also in development with City of Toronto involved, and TAPA and a number of other Toronto-based organizations. But there's, you know, everyone keeps thinking as soon as we get this guidance, then we'll submit it to the province and magically we will have increased opportunities through bigger gathering sizes and bigger capacities. And I'm very discouraged about that. I know that there's tons of great advocacy. FEO's been working really hard. There's a number of other art service organizations that are doing it. I think we need to continue with the planning. That's going to be valuable for every single organization. But I'm as frustrated as Dave is, as frustrated as Rodola is. I did want to point out, and I started typing it in, but I haven't yet, but WSPS has a really strong collection of post-pandemic resources. There's a playbook, there's checklists. We need to use all those things, but that doesn't mean that we are any more likely to be able to open our industries quicker, unfortunately.
Thanks,
Rodola, give
Janet.
us a little cheery moment, because I think I brought everybody down.
Thanks
We can
for
all get in a
sharing that,
bubble.
Janet. Yeah. Dave, we have a question here. Will FEO be putting together information on a set of standards for festivals and events? I know we've tried.
Well,
but-
we've submitted a number of them, and I think the biggest one we did, and Debbie, you were a big part of that, is the case study we done for the Pizza Fest, just using it as an example. But I think it was like a 21-page document, and it included stuff from Janet's group, it included stuff from Rodola's group, you know, a full set of standards on how it would operate, how we would get people in and out, washrooms, safety, everything. Is as close to a plan as we could submit that I think it sort of covers all the bases. But again, we still have not heard back from that. And you know what, I share the frustration, and even alcohol's not helping anymore.
Yay, Madeline's clapping.
Actually, I've got a bit of a note to add.
Sure.
One of the other issues that we run into is that the guidelines vary from location to location. For instance, the City of Ottawa right now is the Event Central office is working with the local public health office to develop a set of guidelines, which they said is going to be available by the end of the month. And they're the ones that we basically have to listen to and go by, because they have to approve our event permit to start with. So you've got that variation as well. So I understand, Rodola, where you're coming from, and that it's very difficult to gain some consistency.
And I think just to add on to that, and I see in some of the notes in the chats that, you know, we still have to keep planning. Well, that's my point, is it's hard to plan for something you don't know what the rules and parameters are going to be. It's a lot easier when you have that set of standards to work around, because, you know, we can keep submitting these things, we can keep tweaking and putting them in. And I think that's the one thing all of the sector associations have been lobbying for, is that the Ministry of Health should have the set of standards, because just as Madeline said, you know, the Ontario government can come out with a set of standards that could be overridden in any different municipality by their municipal health officers, that they're just not going to do that. And that's the way it's sort of broken out. As the restaurants have opened up, you know, some communities decided not to be involved and engaged. And, you know, with 440 different municipalities with 440 different rules and regulations, it's really hard to get that standard that works for everybody.
Well, what I've been doing over the last couple of years is you plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Yep. That's so true. If we can launch.
We will.
Good, Madeline. Is there anything else, Joanne? I don't understand why we cannot open up with limited amounts of people and all the protocols in place. Because I don't know how well, Dave spoke to that, because we've put things in place and it's out of our control. Yeah. Anything else, anyone? I'm not sure I answered your question very well, Joanne, but there's a lot of, as Janet and Rodola and Dave have said, there's a lot of barriers. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This was really great, Rodola. Really appreciate your time. Thanks, Janet, for your comments, and Dave for your comments. We have next week, we're going to have the gentleman from X Events talking about some virtual platforms. And I hope you'll join us next week. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week. Stay safe. And if you need anything, any questions, you know where I am. Thanks.